Hi guys, welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. Okay, so on the past episode, I was just sharing, what I thought was like one of the hardest things about being a poet or writer, even artist, right? I guess it applies, So listen back to that, my thoughts on vulnerability again. I've mentioned that a couple times on this podcast, and it's important, to, take in consideration only write what you're comfortable about. And I think as writers, I'll add in here before we get into the next question of the day here, that it's so important that you write the truth, right? I think it's really incredibly tough, when people say nasty things about you, untrue things, or name call you, or, are just not saying things that are correct, right? And it's not about, no one knows everything, no one's always right, but I think some cases, right, there are two sides to every story, right? Things that people, may not believe you happened, or things like that, or people are saying things that, that what you're saying is not true, but it is, so it's like that whole, writing the truth is important as writers, as artists. And something, that came up the other day, this ties into, being honest and stuff with lit mags and journals too. So I mentioned a while back in, I think it was episode 17, the plagiarism episode. So I had gotten a message in my inbox the other day, guys, about a poem, that was plagiarized, right? That we had in our online publication space. And this was from a poet, and I'm not going to state names again because it's always been addressed and stuff like that, So the question here, is more for editors and, those starting lit mags and journals. So I would say, what do you do, when you discover a poem was plagiarized, right? That you have, in a publication, online or print or wherever it may be, right? So this affects a lot of lit mags and journals every year, right? Plagiarism checkers, I'm just going to say, are not 100% accurate again. And, we do the best we can, a lot of them are really thorough and good. There are some you can, again, pay, fees to have deep dive scans. But for a lot of lit magazine journals, right, in this case, was a poet who had submitted to a bunch of places and got a lot of acceptances, right? And they, none of them had, detected any plagiarism because it wasn't, showing that. A lot of us do, run poems through scanning and searches and try to do our best. But sometimes, plagiarism checkers, they still don't catch everything. And it's hard. I mentioned, some in the community, right? We use, a couple different ones like Quatex. Is it Quatex or Qtex? I can never pronounce things right, guys. Sometimes it's hard. Quetext and small SEO tools, plagiarism checker. A few paid ones are out there that others use or pay a monthly fee to use too, that are maybe a little bit more deep dive and thorough, but I don't know. Everyone's using a different tool out there, or a couple different ones, Google Advanced Searches, stuff like that. But they're not 100% accurate. Again, sometimes you'll run poems and lines, even short stories and writing through, and it won't detect it as, plagiarized. So, again, this case in the community, right, there was a poet, had tons of acceptances, and a lot of lit magazine journals and editors were impacted by this, right? So what a lot of editors do when they discover a poem is plagiarized, right, they, try to inform the community about this so others are aware, because then they can check their poems, right, and see, or others can help, the community identify plagiarism and stuff, right? So in this case, some had, leveraged the CLMP, right, groups and stuff to inform others about that. Also, some editors go to, some of their mailing lists, their subscribers, or, their it could be Facebook groups and things like that. I don't really use Facebook a bunch, or not a whole bunch of, but things like that, and I see sometimes some founding editors, they post on their social media channels or let everyone know, this is happening in the community, right? This is a plagiarist, that's plagiarizing poems and copying others' work, or what happened in the case that we discovered at Dippy Lit Mag, right? So I'm so thankful that, others in the community take the time to inform us about things like that and bring it to our attention as soon as possible. So, we can pull that poem down, right? So typically, some places, the editors, they put a message underneath that poem. They said this poem was plagiarized, and is actually pulled from pieces of these pieces that were published here and here and here. And they put it in red or some color, things like that. Then eventually they take down that work, right? Because it's not original, it's not unique at all. And it wasn't, presented as an after poem or an inspo poem at all. It was outright plagiarism. And there's a huge difference between, doing an inspo poem and then a plagiarized work, right? So again, you have to look at, there are a lot of poets who have had some really wonderful after pieces, inspo pieces, and things like that. And they were 100% original. So, you have to look at some quality examples, that exist about that. But in this case, we had a poet who had taken pieces from the Poetry Foundation site, right? And just mixed a couple things around, changed a couple words. And, sometimes what plagiarists do is that they take from previously published pieces and they try to combine, 3, 4, 5 poems, or sometimes just 1 or 2, and change a couple things. But that's plagiarism, right? And not crediting, anything, no epigraphs, nothing, no quotes or anything. And it's very heartbreaking to see that, when poets pass work off as their own, and it just doesn't make sense, right? You have your own mind, your own heart, soul, memories, and I think you should really leverage that rather than pull from others' work, right? That's been published. It's a crime, right, to do so. Taking from others' work and stuff and trying to pass it off as your own. It impacts, lit magazine journals, right? Think about it. Some places actually have, ended up publishing pieces in print, right, that were plagiarized, and that's expensive and costly for them. They have to pull it down. They have to, revise those issues. They have to, it takes time out of the editors and the volunteer staff to address plagiarism, and it's tough on the community, right? It's never fun. Some places do audio around, poets' work and other things, and it creates disruption in their series and things like that and what the work they're trying to do. So, so I just wanted to reiterate, plagiarism checkers, they're not 100% accurate. It happens to all lit magazine journals from time to time where someone was changing things very, going through it to, so it wouldn't be detected in a sense. A lot of plagiarism checkers, they're not going to catch every single thing. It happens, and we do the best we can as editors, as human beings, to address those things. And right. So some things you can do to some platforms, that's the thing about if you're just using email or something to intake submissions, it's sort of hard to have, there's a block feature, right, on emails and services and stuff. But some platforms like Duotrope, I think they have features where you can have a list of addresses that are no longer permitted or things like that. Even Subfolio, we just moved on there. There's a feature where you can have moderation features, which are really cool. We haven't dived into it a whole bunch yet, but where you can, label something as harassment or something, that's inappropriate, or someone who, has plagiarized and things like that. So, I think, if someone continues to keep plagiarizing, submitting plagiarized work and stuff, it's just really, really messed up and really awful, so yeah, so it happens, I know some in the Lit Mag journal community, again, have lists that they have, to refer to, on names or aliases or addresses, because there's a lot out there. If you go on social media, Twitter, X, formerly, Twitter or X, or, just do some searching, plagiarism, Lit Mags, journals, and it'll come up, in social media searches, some names and stuff, that even Lit Mag News, Becky has shared some repeated names have come up in the community and plagiarists and events happening and incidents. The Lit Mag News Substack and stuff like that, and other founding editors who have, newsletters and stuff, or groups announcements and stuff. So on social media, so it's a ripple effect. When someone plagiarizes and they have work accepted elsewhere, right? Others are like, oh, so these pieces are probably plagiarized then, and you have to check and scan it and comb through it, and sometimes it's hard to identify those. So sometimes poets pull from a mix of online work that's been published, plagiarists. I mean, sometimes plagiarists pull from online work, print work and stuff, and that's really hard to, a mix of things, and it's hard to catch those things. It absolutely is. But again, we do the best we can. So I just wanted to talk about that again. There are, some other tools out there. I mentioned growing up in schools and stuff, they always had us use Turnitin and some other checkers, and we'd have to record our score or see what the score was and stuff like that. And there are some other ones out there, tons out there today, that analyze papers, essays, poems. But I think it's tough, in the poetry community, right? Plagiarism cases, they never stop, right? It's a continuous cycle. Every single year, we see a high amount of cases that come up, and it's never fun to deal with. But yeah, I wish others wouldn't do that. But what can you do? It's just it happens. It happens to artists too. Their work getting copied, and others are passing off as their own, or others pretending to be others and taking their work or making up fake names, fake bios, all that stuff. It's really ridiculous and painful to see that, people doing that to others' work, if someone, it just makes others feel awful, and then people don't feel like sharing their work or putting it out there because of theft and stealing and all of that stuff happening, right? It happens, others are like, maybe I should just keep my work to myself because this is just, it's not stopping, right? The theft, the stealing. I know a lot of fellow artists in the community have had their work lifted, put on sites and all of that stuff, and it's so disrespectful and just horrendous, right? So yeah, I just wanted to do a very short episode on this again since it came up again recently. I always, if we ever discover things like that, we'd pull down the poem immediately, and it's no point in keeping it up, or it's not their work, right? It's just like, yeah. So some places do leave it up for a little bit and say this poem was identified as plagiarized and it pulled from these poets' work and is not original, et cetera, and yeah. So it's important to act on that right away, once it's identified, and to so it's tough though, the tools that a lot of us use in the world aren't perfect and things like that, and it's hard, there's a lot of crime actually there's a lot of crime in the publication space, actually, scams, theft, all of that. So you have to be aware of that stuff, keep in the loop. So I think it's helpful to be a part of the CLMP membership. Yeah, there's a fee, annual fee to join it, but I think it's worth it. And even totally subscribe to some of the community newsletters out there to stay informed if you're going to become editor of a lit mag or journal or things like that. No one knows everything. We all do knowledge exchanges and information. I share information on this podcast and elsewhere, right? And I just do these when I can again. So yeah, I hope hopefully one day things decrease in the world of plagiarism, but I don't think it'll ever stop. There's always going to be individuals out there who are doing things like that, right? And it absolutely is heartbreaking again, and very saddening whenever we hear about this, because we want to support writers and work, but we don't want to support plagiarism at all, right? That's a giant big fat no. And so that's it, guys. I'm not sure what I'll think about if there'll be another episode anytime soon, but we'll see. There might be a long break, after a while. It looks like, nearing 30-ish episodes here. So yeah, I just tried to build out the audio foundation parts of the series I wanted to do again. So we'll see. Well, yeah.